All right, guys. Just recording this real quick because I will be gone tomorrow, and it'll be a nice way for you guys not only to get what was left of your notes, but you guys can have all of this right at your disposal. You can do it whenever you want. You can watch it whenever you want, and this will kind of help you guys with your short quiz tomorrow. And like I mentioned in class, your quiz is going to be nothing more than a bunch of writing. So be prepared to do that, but it's going to be about all types of these social movements, the conspiracies, and then what we're going to get into today, sometimes why these things work and sometimes why they don't. Now, yesterday before we left class, we talked about the beginning of Black Lives Matter, Trayvon Martin, the situation in Florida in 2012. And basically, I kind of introduced the story about how Roe versus Wade was overturned in the United States and how the pro-life movement is going to fight for decades to basically make it happen. And essentially what we are getting into today and trying to close this up is the lady whose name, and if you're a junior, you'll get this story in much more detail when you're a senior. But the woman, the lady whose name is actually on the court case, Jane Roe, who was like an anonymous person, she didn't really want to be identified because she was kind of embarrassed about her past, is actually a woman from Texas named Norma McCorvey. And long story short, she writes several books. She makes appearances, when she kind of reveals who she is after the Roe versus Wade case, literally all the way up in the 1990s. Roe versus Wade was decided in 1972, 73. She's not going to reveal her identity until the 1990s, and basically how she is still involved in the choice movement in the United States, and that's going to be the team that she's on. And basically, what's going to happen is almost like a miraculous story. And the story goes about how she literally has a dream one night that she had started going to church and dreamed about the Antichrist and how they had talked about the Antichrist in church. And the story goes is that, the realization is that the Antichrist that they were talking about in the Bible, in the book of Revelation, was actually her. And how there had been, like 40 or 50 million abortions in the United States up to that point, and how she was the kind of the ringleader for the American Holocaust. And from that point on, Norma McCorvey basically changes teams completely. She goes to the pro-life movement. She goes to rallies, goes to protests, goes to all of these different things, and becomes kind of the martyr of the pro-life movement. I mean, imagine that. The woman whose name was on the case that made abortion legal in the United States completely changes sides and becomes pro-life against every type of abortion. And I told you yesterday about this documentary that they are going to make at the end of her life called AKA Jane Roe, where it goes and it basically shoots her last days as she's dying of cancer. And essentially what both sides do in this documentary, the pro-life and the pro-choice side, is they talk about kind of like how this poor woman who's nothing more than just basically poor white trash from Texas, and how she has been used as nothing more than a pawn for years when it comes to the abortion issue. And basically kind of in her last declaration, she admits, hey, I'm actually pro-choice. I never really changed sides. And essentially, she was used as nothing more than propaganda by the pro-life movement for years and years and years and years, even though she never really changed her mind on things. And basically what we're getting into today is every type of social movement, no matter how just or no matter how crazy they are, there's going to be propaganda that's going to be used. And one of the things that I talked about was the case yesterday with George Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin, the origins of Black Lives Matter. And I showed you guys the picture, the one that you're looking at right now, and I said, now what I want you to do is go home, and this is what I want you to research tonight. What really happened? And I wasn't saying that that Trayvon Martin did anything wrong. He did not. I'm not saying that there was anything that was off in the story. There really wasn't. But basically, as this story gets told, we get flashed this picture over and over and over again of this young child. And in reality, this young child, by the time that this happens, he's 17 years old. I think he's 6'2". He's taller. He's bigger than the guy he wrestles George Zimmerman and fights with before he ultimately is shot and killed. But the picture was set for people in the United States about what this kid looked like. And basically the message that they were trying to get across is not just unarmed black people, but almost unarmed black kids are being killed in the streets. And every social movement, and these are the last two things that you're going to need to know today, is going to have all of these types of things in place where you can look at it and you can easily identify it. So first, every social movement, whether it's pro-life, pro-choice, Black Lives Matter, any of the things that we've talked about, it could be a conspiracy with JFK, or, you know, they're going, I'm watching one right now on Netflix about Malaysians Airline Flight 370, where they're giving all of their theories. But any type of social movement is going to have the following things, and you're looking at it right now. First of all, they're going to have an ideology. That's a set of beliefs that define what the goal of the group really is. And whether it's the pro-life movement, whether it's a Black Lives Matter movement, whether it's a conspiracy, they're always going to have some type of ideology that you can look at, and it's easy to define, hey, this is what this group is after. They're also going to have logos, themes, mottos, ways that they are easily going to identify it. So if I walk in to something today and I say back and to the left, they're going to say, oh, you're talking about JFK. You know, if I talk about anything to do with abortion, they're going to know instantly, am I pro-life or pro-choice? And every one of these groups, every one of these organizations, every movement is going to have a logo, a motto, a theme, a person that's going to define the movement. There's going to be something that you can point at and go, that's what they're trying to do. And then next, every one of these things, no matter if you're a liberal, no matter if you're a conservative, no matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat or a Christian or an atheist or whatever, every group is going to use propaganda. They're going to have one-sided information that's going to promote their beliefs to the public. And that's what they want the public to know exactly. And right below that, there's a term called confirmation bias. And basically what they want people to do when they put all of these things out is they want you to search for reasons to back up what they're telling you, to believe what they're saying. So if it's like Black Lives Matter, you're going to start looking for instances of unarmed black people being killed in the streets. If it's the pro-choice movement or the pro-life movement, you're going to look and find, all right, this is how many women die a year during the abortion procedure. Or on the other side, you may say, this is how many women die a year giving birth to a child in a pregnancy that they never wanted or intended to have in the first place. Confirmation bias is finding information that upholds what you are being told or what the belief that you might have is. All right, now, as we're going down through here, there's going to be several times in the history of the world where sometimes, for whatever reasons, these social movements, it's like they're going to start, but then they're going to stop. They're going to fail. And what you guys are looking at right now is the Ayatollah, basically the spiritual leader of Iran. And they asked him several years ago, they said, you know, how many gay people are there in Iran? And I think Iran is a country of over 80 million people right now. And the Ayatollah answered, you know, that there's no gay people in Iran. Not one, not a single gay person in Iran. And if you look at the next slide, you're going to see what looks like men, you know, being hanged from cranes. And basically what you are seeing right here is the gay people in Iran being executed. And anytime somebody has tried to start a human rights movement in Iran, it's almost always going to be shot down. In the next one of the most famous scenes ever from the history of the world is Tiananmen Square, June 5th, 1989, where you have over 2 million people in China, your age, people 16 to 21 years old, wanting democracy, wanting openness. They want to be like the United States. They had saw what had happened in Germany. They had saw all of these other old Soviet countries that had basically fell, and man, they wanted it. And the video that you're watching is a guy who is forever going to be known as Tank Man. And they are literally, the Chinese Red Army is sending in tanks to wipe this threat out, to kill this guy. And he stands up, and nobody knows who he is. He stops the tanks. And then we never hear from this guy again. So one of the biggest mysteries really in the history of the modern world is, who is Tank Man and what happens to him? But one thing that we know about China from 1989 to now, nothing changes. There's no democracy in China. It's one-party rule. It's the Chinese Communist country, the Chinese Communist state, the CCP. And if you look at the slide that's basically coming up, it's going to talk about different types of social movements that are going to fail. Chinese democracy, human rights in Middle Eastern countries like gay rights, women's rights in Saudi Arabia, and how these things are going to fail. And how every one of these social movements, you're going to see the two terms there, relative deprivation, resource mobilization. Relative deprivation means that these social movements are going to start when people think they're being denied a basic right. And they're going to try to form. And that's what happens in China in 1989. But right below it where it says resource mobilization. And it basically talks about how these ideas are only going to grow if there's things behind it that's going to make it and allow it to grow. And in some of these cases, like in Iran, in China, in the Middle East, quite simply, these social movements, they're going to stop. Why? Money. They're not going to have the money. The government's going to freeze any assets that they have. They're going to lock their bank accounts up so they can't spend money to get their message out. Media attention. Places like the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, China, where the government runs the media. There's not going to be citizen journalists who basically say, hey, here's what's going on. Media, there's going to be none. It's basically going to be non-existent. They're going to control the internet and the access that people are going to have to the internet so they can't get information. And then they're basically going to ban all of the ways that they can organize. So all of these things are going to be why social movements fail. No money, no media, no way to organize, no access to the internet, no way to share your information. So even though so many of these social movements are ongoing, there's going to be examples all over the world. Chinese isn't democratic. Gays still basically live in hiding in the Middle East. Women's rights in Saudi Arabia are basically non-existent, for example, and all of these are going to fail because of these things. All right, tomorrow's going to be basically a quiz with a lot of writing. All of the notes that you have are there. Be prepared, be ready. And we'll talk to you tomorrow. See you then.